Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Seeking Play podcast. My name is Dr. Jane Hession.
And I'm Ronan Healy.
And we are the founders of a service design studio based in Limerick, Ireland. In case you missed our introductory episode, the name Seeking Play is in honour of the wonderful work of the late Jaak Panksepp.
Jaak was a pioneer in the field of affective neuroscience. He actually coined that phrase. And it was reading Jaak's work a number of years ago that I think was the insight that there is more to play than we realized. We were quite naive to it. And it was, I think, the first of many steps in terms of reading a variety of different literatures. But for us, I think Jaak's work and the books that are here certainly was an important milestone. And we covered this slightly in the first introductory episode, but just to recap a little bit, Jaak and his researchers identified 7 primary emotions within the human brain or within mammalian brains. And for us, as we were reading Jaak's work, we always thought that seeking being one, it's described as the baseline emotion. It's an expectancy, or you could imagine it as foraging. And for us, it's a sense of curiosity, that kind of drive. If that curiosity drive for us is now we associate it with seeking. And then as Lego series play facilitators who were trying to understand what is play and why do we play, we were very much gravitated towards the play primary emotion. So the name for us kind of just nearly named itself. For us, we were seeking what is play, so hence the name Seeking Play.
Our first guest on season 1 was Dr. Christian Montag. Dr. Christian Montag is a professor of molecular psychology at the University of Ulm. For us, Christian was a wonderful first guest because he also had the honor of working alongside the late Jaak Panksepp. We have now watched back our interview with Christian, and we have identified 3 quotes that we really enjoyed that we're going to share with you. Having read Jaak Panksepp's work, it became clear to me how important our emotional lives are to explain who we are and how we can achieve well-being. Mother Nature gave us a play circuit, which needs to be stimulated if we want to grow into mentally healthy adults.
I get the last one.
You can get the last one.
It's enlightening to bring the theories of flow and affective neuroscience together so we can understand what happens in our brain. And we reference a book during the conversation with Christian. It's called Animal Emotions, How They Drive Human Behaviour. And this book is free to access. We will link it to the show notes. It's a short read relative to a lot of other work in relation to affective neuroscience. I think we wished we could find it first, but happy to have gone through the more challenging aspects of affective neuroscience. So it's there. It's short read. It's very accessible, and it'll be linked in the show notes. And we also reference the ANPS, or the Affective Neuroscience Personality Scale. And this was developed by Jaak and all of his other colleagues as well. And you can complete this questionnaire. There's a short version, which is about 5 or 10 minutes, or just a slightly longer version. And it will, through your own answering your own questions, give you a kind of a schematic view of your primary emotions. Mm-hmm. Thankfully,
we both did it before.
We did it, and we were. They'll give you the mean, the average of respondents, and we were didn't come as too much of a surprise. We were overly playful. We were high on the play trait. And there's also we reference other pieces of work that Christian has produced, and we will also provide those in the show notes as well. Mm-hmm. So for now,
we hope you enjoy the first episode as much as we had, the fun recording it as well. So enjoy, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Christian Montag, thank you so much for being on the Seeking Play podcast. We are delighted that you're here. And as we're saying in our pre-show chat, you really had to be our first guest. So again, thank you so much for that.
It's an honor for me to be here, of course, and I wish you all the best with your new podcast. A lot of people will listen to this.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, I know my grandmother is a good supporter of what we do. So we'll definitely have a listener, maybe not listeners, plural. And look, we'll get into obviously why really we were pinning our hopes that you would be our first guest of all of the wonderful guests. And we're surprised ourselves at the caliber of people who are willing to chat about play and playfulness. But for us, it was always had to be you. And again, no pressure. And we didn't say this in the email, but turns out you were willing to be our first guest. And look, I'm going to go through the formal introduction of who is this Christian Montag chap.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with whoever I am.
it's a big existential start. We're jumping in on the deep end here. But according to your biography, which is very impressive, Professor Christian Montag is a professor for molecular psychology at Ulm University and was visiting professor at the University of Electronic Science and Technology of China in Chengdu. Christian is interested in the molecular genetics of personality and emotions. He combines molecular genetics with brain imaging techniques such as structural functional MRI to better understand individual differences in human nature. Adding to this, he conducts research in the fields of neuroeconomics and addiction, including new approaches to psychoinformatics.
Wow.
That's correct. Can we stop here or?
What an incredible, I'm exhausted even listening to that bio. So firstly, thank you so much for you're incredibly busy taking the time to chat with us today. Definitely.
It's very impressive.
Very impressive.
And to give our listener, my grandmother, context of, how did we happen upon Christian Montag is Jane and I, it sounds slightly corny, but we do a play date on Monday mornings in our office where we look for academic journals and papers and even books that have been released in relation to play and playfulness. And about a year ago, or maybe a little bit longer, Jaak Panksepp is a search term that we go for. We're checking in on, or affective neuroscience. We read the how you linked the ANPS, which we'll get into, to the 5 personality traits. And like we normally do, we just reach out to the researchers and say, thank you for bringing this into the world. It's helped us, and which is very much part of our learning journey, understand what is play and why do we play. And you very kindly said, let's have a chat. And that was over a year ago. So that's how we know you. We kind of annoyed you. We're fans.
No, you didn't. I love to talk to people. Particularly, I think it's great what you're doing. So a lot of people spend their time different than you obviously do on Mondays. You dig through scientific papers. I think a lot of people would say, well, that's a different kind of activity we usually do on Mondays.
It's funny. It's actually, we find it a reprieve. We find it energizes us for the week. So yeah, it's an interesting reframe.
Anyhow, it's so good that we reconnect and that we talk a bit today.
Absolutely. So we want to understand you first of all. We understand you. So Jane's going to kick off with our first question.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be great for the listeners maybe just to hear a bit of background, Christian, about, what were you like as a kid? If you could maybe just share some insights with us.
Yeah, that's a good question. And if I reflect on my childhood, I think I was very privileged in terms of having very parents who were really supportive in fulfilling also our potentials. And if I look back, I was a guy who was rather introverted, to be honest. So I was really into books. You probably don't see it in the background, but I have a lot of guitars. So I was really into music and songwriting. And it was more me activity, not too social. And I think that was the basis also for me to become a scientist, because I love reading. I started to write a lot. And that's what I still do these days, write a lot, read a lot, and think about the world. So in so far, I think this started all in my childhood.
And if you can kind of think back in your childhood, is there any bumps or scrapes or breakages or bruises that can kind of tell an interesting story of your childhood, but that you think helped form part of your identity as an adult?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot tell you about a bruise or something. That's good for me, I guess. Also,
Yeah.
I'm mentally stable these days because we know how strong the impact can be if you experience something traumatic from very early on for the development of the young brain. But anyhow, I mean, clearly, what shapes us in the beginning, aside from genetics, is clearly your parents, your peers, and how you grow up. And I think I had an interesting mix because my dad, he was a businessman, but my mom is an artist, and I think I got from both worlds a lot. So the creative part, but also the part which helps me to manage a lot of things in everyday life. And I think the greatest gift I got from my parents is traveling. So I was very privileged as a child and adolescent that my parents already showed me from early on the world. So we have been to a lot of travels, not only in Europe, but the US and so forth, which clearly helps you to have an open mind. And therefore, I'm really thankful.
Okay. So I think what I would be really interested to, hear from your perspective is, what does adult playfulness mean to you, Christian?
That's a good question. Of course, it's not the rough and tumble play. We see what Jaak is talking about, and we will talk about this a bit later. Of course, I do rough and tumble play these days with my daughter. Yeah. She's now in the age with 5 where rough and tumble play is, of course, an important part of everyday life. So I'm happy to engage in this activity again because it's very joyful. But play activity in adults means often stylized play. It means play which has certain kind of rules. It's making puns on each other, so it has to do with humor. And I think for myself, it has to do that I'm sometimes still have the boy in me, a boyish attitude sometimes, so that we, as we all know, we all don't want to grow up, and that you keep a bit of this still while you're an adult.
And that's interesting you say that. So how do you strike that balance in the workplace between taking work seriously, but not taking work too seriously?
Yeah, that's actually quite difficult because in my area, I mean, science these days, or also in my area, is very data driven, and we have to be very careful in how we run our experiments and run the stats and do exact writing. So if you think about this way, it's rather a serious matter. How can I have fun with this? I think first of all by choosing the right topics where I really want to engage and have passion for it. And I think that's also part of the fun, to speak a lot of people in the world about your research. That's really fun, and to connect to a lot of people. And that's, I think, joyful. In my work, what's also particularly joyful is that I can see the world and exchange my ideas with persons from very different cultures. And this has also joyful and sometimes playful aspect.
Yeah, and I think, what would be really interesting as well to kind of, go back again to your childhood is, when you do think back to, I suppose when you were starting out your career, what advice would you give maybe to your younger self about either being maybe more serious or maybe being more playful in the way that you interacted with others, thinking back on your early stages of your career?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I think taking things a bit more lightheartedly often would be good. I mean, I'm a guy also from my personality who's always pushing myself. So I have strong inner motivation, and I think having a bit more of serenity would be good. And, I mean, as I said, I've read a lot, and I have read a lot about philosophy, and I'm really a fan of Stoic philosophy, that you just have this mindset, okay, change the things you can change.
Yes.
But the rest you just have to endure and trust in your abilities, and be a bit better in this. I think from early on would be good, would have been better for me.
Yeah, wonderful.
Interesting. When we were choosing our son's name, I suggested Seneca.
And but your son's name is not Seneca.
No, we settled on Noah. We settled on Noah.
Okay, that's also very, very much going back to the Bible, but that's
yes, it is. Yes, but yes, there was a lot of back and forth during COVID about, which is a beautiful name, Seneca, but Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would have had to spend a lot of my, and his life explaining what the name meant, to many people. So beautiful name, but yes, no, we were happy with their choice.
Yeah, we were ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you become interested in your field of research?
That's a long story. I make it short. I mean, it took me really quite a while to find something which I'm really interested in, because I started to study psychology when I was middle of the 20s already. So I was a bank accountant. I had a band, and I was touring, and I was self-employed doing web design. So I did a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
And when I turned middle of 20, somehow I thought, okay, this is all nice. Somehow, although the music really fulfilled me, we were not that successful. So you have to earn a living. And then reality kicked in, and I said to myself, okay, do I want to go with my life? And then I started to study psychology, and still it took years for me to find something which would fulfill me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, at least for me, certain people were really important for my CV. And I had a mentor, he's called Martin Reuter, who's also a close friend of mine. And he, from early on, saw in me a scientist, which I have personally not seen. He said, Christian, you're going to be a great scientist. And I said, really, what? Because I mean, it was Martin. I looked up to him, and he had a huge track record, and still has, of course, a great scientist. And I think it can never be that good. And this was also never my aim, but he supported me very strongly.
Yeah.
And, I tried several different things also. So did assessment center and whatever in the industry, because it was more closely to my bank account being.
Mm-hmm.
But it all did not fulfill me. And then I said one day, you know what? I trust Martin, and I go in this direction. And he supported me strongly in my early career, until also my habilitation dissertation and my first, also then when I got a full professor, so that I owe him a lot regarding being a mentor and nudging me towards a direction which I have not seen for myself.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly insightful as well, when other people, see things in us, that we actually don't see in ourselves as well, and give us that belief and motivation.
That's very important. And sometimes, I think social connections are so meaningful in our lives, because we're social beings, and it can be very rewarding and important to get this kind of feedback when you're stuck.
Yeah.
You're not getting somewhere, and really hearing also what others have to say about you, which of course can also sometimes be very painful. This kind of feedback is really bringing us forward.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think probably staying in that moment of your early stages of your career. So how then did your career evolve, let's say, over time to where you are now?
Well, it started all out that I studied in Gießen psychology, and then that was lucky for me. Martin got his first professor position, and he needed to move to Bonn, and this is close to Cologne, where is my hometown. So that was a sign from heaven, as we say, and it was really cool that I could go back to where I grew up, and I established the molecular genetic laboratory with Martin under his guidance, and more and more then were interested more also in brain imaging. So, and we had really good equipment there at Bonn, and I could run a lot of fascinating research. But then it comes a point in time where you clearly also have to think, okay, what are my inner research interests? Martin did a lot of emotional research in the past, which I'm still interested in. But I found for myself in particular this digitization complex, or these questions, how does digital society change our brains, which is probably these days most important research area.
Because we've got a lot of 5-year-old listener fans here, a huge 5-year-old following in our podcast. For the 5-year-old followers, could you explain your work to these 5-year-olds? We just want to really strip it down and simplify it. which can be complex.
Yeah, but let's break it down. So I think what's fascinating about humankind is that we share a lot of things, and of course, in these crazy times, we don't want to stress individual differences too much, because we are more the same than we're different.
Yeah.
Sometimes the differences are overpronounced. If you take a look at the daily news, I think we're human mankind, and we should live peacefully together. But clearly, there is a long discipline where I also come from to study individual differences and ask the questions: why I'm the person that I am, or why are we the creatures where we are, or who we are? And I try to answer this question with different methods. So I try to disentangle genetics and the influence of environments on personality. I try to understand the brain of different personality types look like. Type is not such a good word, because we rather speak of dimension. Finally, I try to tackle the biology underlying of who we are.
So moving on to a topic that I'm really interested to hear more about is, could you share with our listeners how you first came to meet Jaak Panksepp, and what research did you do with him?
Yeah, I still remember my first interaction with Jaak. I was still a student of psychology in Gießen, where he was invited, and I was introduced to him by Martin, about whom I already talked today. This led, of course, also due to Martin's interest, to a lot of interest from my side to read Jaak Panksepp's book, Affective Neuroscience, of course, and a lot of his empirical papers. Then we have lost sight of each other, because I was a student. Jaak was always very much interested in research from everyone, also students. He was not a guy with a high nose, say, oh, I only talk to the professors. He was the kind of guy standing in front of the poster of the student and get engaged with the students. So a great person. It happened to be, I think it was around 2012 or something. I don't know anymore exactly the date, but my wife happened to work in Seattle, and I was also in Seattle at this time, and Jaak reached out to read a paper from me. And I just answered him and said, oh, well, Jaak, here's the paper. Great to reconnect. And by the way, I'm in Seattle. And he immediately responded, well, then you're invited. You have to come to my house in Pullman, which is quite a drive, of course, from Seattle.
Yes.
We're talking about 6-7 hours, I guess it was. But we wanted to go to a Yellowstone National Park, and then I said to my wife, okay, that's fantastic. We have to do a small itinerary to make a stop at Jaak's place. And that's then how we re-met in person, and started then also to work more closely with each other, which led to a series of papers we also did over the years. And on the one hand, we worked more conceptually. So among others, did a paper with him where we tried to build a bridge between his theory and Ekman's theory on facial faces and facial emotion. And because this happened to be a work, because I said, well, Jaak, there are some similarities, but there are also differences between Ekman's point of view on basic emotion and yours, and how can we bring this together? And this was just a question I had actually out of academic interest, and it happened to be a paper in the end. I did, but I did way more research in the fields to understand if individual differences in primary emotional systems, which have been detected by Jaak Panksepp, form the basis of our personalities. And this is still research I'm really interested in. And this goes back not only to Jaak's work, but clearly also to Ken Davis, with whom I do a lot of research, who was also the founder of the Affective Neuroscience Personality Scales. And as sometimes tragedy brings nice moments, after Jaak died, I then finally also met Ken in person, and we are in the meanwhile good friends, and try to keep on Jaak's legacy in the scientific community.
Yeah, and it is a legacy that will always continue. I think, like any research, it never ends when a researcher is no longer with us. And so if you could kind of reflect on, how do you think Jaak's work and the work you're continuing to do has advanced our understanding of human personality?
I think a lot, because what is at the core of who we are, and I know that some concepts such as trine brain concept are heavily under fire at the moment, and there are reasons for this. But obviously, still humans, we are mammals, and we have a mammalian nature. And I think after having read Jaak Panksepp's work, it became more clearer to me of what kind of creatures we are, and how important emotional lives are to explain who we are as persons, but also to understand how we can achieve well-being. And in this way, Jaak fundamentally shaped my view also of human mankind, insofar that I understand also that the most important taxonomy of personality in the field, namely the big five of personality, are likely strongly driven by primary emotional systems, which are subcortical, anchored in the human brain.
I suppose, you're talking about the human, personality, but how do you think Jaak's, work has advanced now, our understanding of play?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I also see it's fascinating for students if they get in contact for the first time with Jaak's theory, is that they are intrigued to find play as a primary emotion. And most people, when they got to know about Jaak Panksepp, they know him as the reticular, because has been among the forefront of people to disentangle the basis of play and laughter in rats. And this is really fascinating work. And I think shedding the light on the importance of the play circuit also for humans is of tremendous importance, in particular in digital societies, because what we see is that our offspring, our youngest minds, they are spending more and more screen time, which means as a consequence that they are not nourishing their innate play tendencies for rough and tumble play and so forth. And I know the screen time debate is very complex, and I don't want to simplify it here, but nevertheless, what we know is that Mother Nature gave us a play circuit, and this needs to be stimulated if we want to grow up into mentally healthy adults. And we have now more and more industries which try to prolong online times. We know this from social media with the data business model behind it. We know this from a lot of video games, and younger kids are engaging more and more in these platforms. And I think Jaak's theories here really helpful. Rethink what it means to be human and what we actually need to do to grow up into mental healthy and stable persons. And clearly, play is of huge importance. And as we know, it's the rough and tumble play which fosters social competence, helps children to train their motoric skills. This is also important. Rereading Jaak is really something which I think is more and more helpful as a guide also in our digital society.
Yeah, I mean, even yesterday I was, listening to one of his TED Talks, and, what really stuck with me was, human relationships are the best form of antidepressants. And I think, that's, really echoing mirroring what you're saying as well, Christian, for sure.
And I think it does speak to part of the ethos of what we bring as a design studio, is I can't say over-reliance on technology, but a reliance on technology for adults to communicate with one another. And we're just trying to get people to understand the value of being in a room and communicating with one another, be it with Lego or without. The act of, like you said, we're highly social creatures, to actually go analog a little bit. The face-to-face interactions are incredibly important for building trust and understanding in a complex business environment.
And Ron, you must see it, I think, in everyday life, also after the pandemic now, how much people long for interacting with each other without a screen, without a video conference. I mean, obviously these tools are great, otherwise we couldn't easily chat to each other, but everything comes with a price. And we do a lot of research at the moment on video conference fatigue, because I mean, we are also longing to reconnect again, to meet people in person, because it's differently rewarding to see someone interact without these screens.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a nice segue into your book, which we are going to link to in our show notes. And we loved your book, Animal Emotions, How They Drive Human Behaviour. Can you elaborate more on the seeking system?
Yeah, before I talk about the seeking system, I mean, there's actually a nice and sad story behind this book, and you can advertise it because it's available for free as a download at Panksepp Books, so people don't have even to pay money for it. And the idea behind this book was, it was before Jaak unfortunately died in 2017, that we write a short layman's introduction to his theory. That was the idea behind this book, and not, as Jaak said, a fat one again, but rather small one, which provides people with the basic ideas about his theory. I mean, Affective Neuroscience is beautifully written, but it's a very mighty book to read. And that was the idea, and Jaak agreed to do this with me, but unfortunately, as we all know, he lost his fight against cancer. And that was the time when I reached out to Ken Davis, one of his first PhD students, who finished this project with me, which has just from the idea started with Jaak, but Jaak didn't do any writing, and Ken hopped in, which was a perfect fit, of course, due to the history on the ANPS and also their relationship. And anyhow, coming back to this question, this book reflects clearly also on the primary emotional systems and the seeking system. And there is I think, fantastic metaphor in Jaak's work explaining very well what the seeking system is in our brains. Namely, it's an energy system. Energy, that's what he always said, is delight. And you probably know this from yourself. I included some personal stories on each primary emotional system to illustrate it in my book. Is that, I mean, if you have really slept well and you get up in the morning and say, oh, I have so much power, and perhaps you have even a day off and you just can put your activity in all kinds of different things. That's seeking. Seeking is in itself a system which can be directed into a lot of things. So traveling, experience, culture, but clearly also the evolutionary, more basic things such as looking for food or partner. It's a general energy system, and therefore it comes not as a surprise if this system is underaroused. This goes along with demotivation, and this is clearly also core of understanding the depressed mind, because the depressed mind is not only characterized by high sadness, for example, but also by low seeking activity. And due to the works of Jaak, we know, because he did a lot of electrical brain stimulation studies, that the medial forebrain bundle, that's a massive structure in the brain, represents the core structure underlying the seeking system.
For me, it was an interesting. It helped me reframe curiosity. It felt like it felt more than curiosity. It felt like curiosity had more movement. I constantly think of seeking more than curiosity, or I think of curiosity with an approach feeling, with a movement feeling. So true curiosity is to move from your own belief structure and system to move towards something else. And the word seeking has really helped me reframe curiosity, or add a different kind of a feel to it.
That makes a lot of sense, because I mean, a prerequisite for being curious is clearly that you have an energized mind. If this is not happening, you cannot be curious about the world. And it also fits that in our research we see strong correlations between high seeking and high openness for experience, where we know that facets of openness for experience are intellect, imagination, being interested in arts, and so forth. And I think that's the area you're also speaking about and touching. We're talking about also having a creative mind, not only a curious mind, which clearly touches also upon the seeking system.
I suppose staying on track with the seeking system, I'm just going to move on to the ANPS. We touched on that just earlier. So Ronan and I completed the ANPS and we did score high, very high on seeking and play. So would you be able to explain the ANPS to our viewers, as we're going to link it obviously in our show notes for them to complete as well? Just a brief kind of overview of what it is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. I mean, the ANPS is a self-report questionnaire which has been constructed by Ken Davis and by Jaak Panksepp to translate the research findings from brain science to personality psychology. And the idea obviously is all mammals have a seeking system, all mammals have a play circuit, all mammals have an anger system, and so forth. So we're talking about 7 primary emotions, which we all share. These neuronal circuits underlying these psychological systems, obvious both from structural and functional points of view, a bit different across people. Some people have different medial forebrain bundle in terms of structure or function, which could be an explanation for the fact that they have a higher or lower seeking system. So although we all have a seeking system, perhaps you both also differ a bit in the scores you achieve. So that's individual differences. And the idea was a bit because Jaak worked basically with electrical stimulation, lesion studies of the mammalian brain, and also with pharmacological challenge tests. So he was giving animals, for example, oxytocin or neuropeptide. He was interested to understand what brain areas are underlying what emotional systems. And by this kind of work, he summed up and say, okay, I observe through my lens of work 7 primary emotional systems. And as you can imagine, I mean, a lot of psychologists are not working with neuroscientific techniques, so they don't do brain imaging. Of course, most people don't do deep brain stimulation, but still there are lessons to be learned from Jaak Panksepp's theory. So he said, okay, this might be interesting for personality psychologists, so that we start to create a scale according to my findings from the neurosciences, so that we describe these 7 primary emotional systems in terms of individual differences, so that some people have higher anger or higher fear system or a higher play system, or as you talked about, a higher seeking system. That was a bit the outline. And of course, this approach is very different from what we have seen so far in the literature. If we talk about the big 5, the ocean model consists of openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The big 5 have been detected by a lexical approach. So that's very different. So psychologists used the study of language to understand who we are and to come up with this big 5. Jaak's approach is very different from this. So, and Ken's. It was, now we do brain science, we do experiments there, and because we have detected with neuroscientific methods 7 primary emotional systems, we design a scale according to these insights, which is of course a different approach than the lexical one. And coming back now to your scores, I'm in a high seeking mind. We have discussed this as a mind full of energy, for a mind which is very curious, a mind which wants to go and see the world. And therefore, we discussed this already. It's not surprising that there are associations with openness to experience. For example, to experience different cultures, which might be something you're also interested in. And then we have the high play scores, which go along with very joyful personalities, which love humor, which love to play. And probably it also comes not as a surprise that high play is associated with high extroversion, if translated to the big 5, because we know that extroverted people are socially outgoing, they are more vivid, but they can be also assertive. And I think it's really interesting to see extroversion through a play lens. And then that's the theory now, that perhaps children who from early on engage in a lot of rough and tumble play might lay their ground for being more extroverted in the future.
It's interesting. When we were rereading actually your book as well, we started to reflect on, again, this is a very generic persona of an Irish person, okay? But what we thought about, again, our kind of Irish persona is that when you said it's an openness to travel and experiencing new things, like in our stereotype of Irish people is also being playful. And as we were reading it rereading your book a few days ago, we just thought maybe that Irish people generally have been immigrants to countries for hundreds of years at this stage. So there's a cultural immersion just through the lack of economic opportunity in our world, and how maybe that has helped, part of the identity of being Irish, and the playfulness is maybe.
That's an interesting thought. And what we would need to do is that we do a cross-cultural study, right?
Yeah.
What have I started?
Just in Irish people and in other cultures, to see if the Irish indeed outscore other cultures in terms of their seeking activity.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
Wow.
Okay. We got to get a big Irish cohort of respondents to the ANPS. Let's see that.
What we need to do now.
So in your book, you discuss flow, and then you link, the flow state to seeking care and play. Would you be able to elaborate a bit on that for our listeners, please?
Yes. First of all, I mean, I discuss in my book the flow concept according to Csikszentmihalyi, was a very famous psychologist who introduced the flow concept. And what does he understand when he speaks about flow? He describes a state of immersion where we deeply dive into, for example, work or another activity. It's a state which is accompanied by lots of positive emotion. And we can experience flow not only when we work, but also clearly. The classic example is the mountaineer hanging in between the rocks and reading, or even if you're a medical doctor and you have to concentrate on an operation or whatever. So it's a state of mind where you're really focused.
Yeah.
And obviously accompanied by positive emotions. And if we talk about positive emotions, clearly in Jaak's world, we talk about seeking energy. It's an energetic mind. So this is, of course, a prerequisite for experience flow. And what I just wanted to mention is that because it's a model and there is only a few research out there really bridging Jaak's idea with the flow concept of Csikszentmihalyi, is that, of course, we can experience flow when we are meaningfully interacting with other humans. And a playful activity means that I'm in the here and now, interacting with a person, and I'm often very focused on this. I'm really zoning in what we're doing together. And of course, this could also happen such a flow state if we have a very meaningful, deep conversation, as we now have. Time flies, but we talk to each other, and this can also be accompanied by a state of flow. I think we have all these wonderful theories, and it's really enlightening to bring them together. And I think the flow theory by Csikszentmihalyi is highly interesting. But I think combining this with Jaak's view helps us a bit to even more grasp what's underlying the flow concept. Also, if we think more about what's going on in our brains.
And again, back to what we bring to our clients is that we're really trying to get people into this group flow through the act of movement, socially relating. If you could maybe kind of help us with a framing for serious play. So because from understanding your work and Jaak's work, it seems, you can correct us here, that sports is kind of touching on anger and play at the same time. Or am I correct in that? Like there's a point where, is it seeking anger play?
Well, I think First, what comes to my mind is also if you go on YouTube and take a look at Jaak's interviews, and he talks about play. He, on the one hand, talks about this rough and tumble play, which is the archaic form, really nourishing the circuits of our brain, and then there is more stylized play. So if we talk about soccer these days or other sports, it has a playful side clearly, but it has a lot of rules, which does not mean rough and tumble play has no rules. There is a rule: don't hurt someone.
Yes.
Also, rough and tumble play often looks like having an aggressive side. It actually is not aggression. So because it has a bodily component, but it's not that you hit each other or something. And if this happens while there is rough and tumble play going on, usually the one side hurting the other, saying, "Oh my God, I didn't want this," immediately apologizing, going there. And this is clearly the rule which exists with rough and tumble play. But it's compared to sports where play often plays a role, or these days in Germany, we have a huge scene where you play certain board games or like chess or other stuff. There you have a lot of rules. And particularly if you have this, you have some motoric things to do with your hands, but it's not these full body movements, which you also see in sports, for example. But again, stylized play, and that was a term Jaak always used, is a way more sophisticated form of play, of course. Clearly also goes along with way more rules. And this was not what he usually had in mind when he talked about play behavior, in particular in childhood. Here he meant the archaic rough and tumble play always. So I think with serious play, you perhaps mean, and that would be interesting to discuss with a lot of other experts in the field, perhaps also the strong ambition side, so that you want to achieve while you are doing sports, also with a certain kind of aggression, which you perhaps need in certain sports to become the winner of a certain game. What's interesting in Jaak's work, anyhow, is that he observed, and this is also clearly, I think, true for humans, if you observed rat play, if one side of both rats tended to win after time, all the time, the bully, that was not fun anymore for the other side. The other side was disengaging, because real play also means that both sides win from time to time.
And I think that translates to the workplace as well. I mean, there's always a concession. There's always a give and take. There's budgets that are won and sometimes they're lost. And that's again, that for us helped us kind of understand play physiologically, and also then start to translate it into the workplace. It helped. It was a lovely way for us to
there might be playful aspect, clearly, because we're fighting about limited resources in this world. And there might be a playful attitude in achieving to get the grant for your research or get a better salary or whatever. And of course, not everyone can ask the best salary. But this said, I mean, with limited resource, there's always the downside, if you don't get it, that it might frustrate people. And this is again at the core of the anger system, right? That we are in a world where we have to fight for limited resources. On the other hand, if we talk about the anger system, it is a system which is of importance to also protect your offspring, right? If you think about the mammalian kingdom, that you show anger behavior with overt aggression if you want to protect your offspring from a predator or something.
But we've taken a lot of your time.
Yes,
I'm going to get Jane to...
I have one final question, and yes, we've taken up a lot of your time. I've enjoyed every second of it, I must say. It's gone so fast. But one final question, keeping with playfulness in the workplace. What one piece of advice, Christian, could you offer our listeners about play and playfulness in the workplace?
I think that's a difficult question, because does mean different things, I was thinking. But what I imagine for myself, if I reflect a bit about my career, is that I choose the topics I work on wisely. And I try always find topics I work on which I love, which have a playful side, because play means that I enjoy these things. All goes along with a lot of joy. And why is this so important? If we don't choose also our job lives wisely, I mean, we invest so much of our lifetime in jobs, then I think we will never excel in our jobs, because an important prerequisite is that we have passion for what we do. And I think, at least for me personally, passion comes also with having fun and finding opportunities to engage with a certain activity in a playful way. Of course, this doesn't mean rough and tumble play in everyday life, but it can also be very playful to dig through enormous amounts of data and to discuss with people. That's what we see, that play clearly means something different if we grow up. But it is, according to Jaak, one of the important sources of joy in our life. And therefore, it's so important that we don't forget about our playful nature.
Yes.
I got goosebumps.
Yes.
Thanks for the goosebumps. Christian, look, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're so delighted that you can share your experience with working with Jaak, and that you're our first guest. It really meant so much that you...
For me, all with great minds will join and share their experiences.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you. Take care.